Hi, my name is Beth Taylor, and today we are going to talk about how to use DNA to find an unknown parent. This is a process that can be used to find the parents of an adoptee or to find the parent when one parent is unknown. It can also be used, a similar process can be used to find unknown grandparents and so forth. So let's go ahead and get started. So this is a process that uses autosomal DNA. And our goal in this process is, like we said, to find an unknown parent. So the process we're going to find is this. So the first step is to do clustering and use shared matches to focus just on the matches for that unknown parent in your match list. Then you're going to review the trees of those matches to find a common ancestor among those trees. So the idea is that you've created a cluster for the unknown parent, and then you look at all of their trees and see if you can figure out how they're related to each other. So you kind of take the person whose parent is unknown out of the mix and focus on the cluster that you create around the unknown parent. Once you've found that common ancestor, you identify the descendants of the common ancestor, and then you start looking for connections. You take the person, whose parent is unknown, and you look for connections between dates and places and descendants between the descendants of the common ancestor and the person in question. So in order to kind of demonstrate this process, we're gonna walk through the process using Steve. So Steve wants to find his biological father. Here's what we know about Steve. Steve was born in 1971 in Arizona. His mother, Kathy, died in 2003, and Kathy told Steve 3 different names for his father, and he doesn't believe any of them. Steve does know that Kathy was living in California from about 1968 to 1970. So remember, again, he's born in 1971. We're looking for, where was Kathy about 9 months before Steve was born? And we know that Kathy was born in 1947 in Utah. So sometimes you want to think a little bit about, how old was Kathy at the time of Steve's birth? So if she's born in 47, she probably got pregnant when she was about 23, and Steve was born when she was 24. So this kind of gives us a sense, are we talking about a teenage pregnancy? Are we talking about something else? What's going on? Okay, so the next thing that we want to do is start working with Steve's matches. So here's a spreadsheet representing Steve's matches. These are people who share DNA in common with Steve. So we've extracted his matches into a spreadsheet just for ease of access. So we're going to start with Steve's top match. Steve's top match is Janet. And Steve actually knows who Janet is. Janet is his first cousin. It's Kathy's sibling's child. So that means that Janet is related to Steve on his mother's side. Now it can be easy to say, well, we don't want to look at Janet at all because we're not interested in his mother's side. However, we need to use somebody from Janet's mother's side and create a cluster for his maternal side so that we can exclude it from the results. So because Janet is a known relative on his mother's side, this is actually good because it lets us identify which people to ignore. So we start with Janet because we can't figure out the father's side because the father's side is unknown. So we're going to start with Janet, and we're going to use the shared matches feature. We're going to build a cluster around Janet, and highlight all of the other people in Steve's match list who share DNA in common with Janet. That includes Kenneth, Peggy, Dorothy, Nicole, Christina, Daniel, and Rebecca. Once we've identified those people, also Elizabeth, sorry, we're going to mark them in gray because they are not related to Steve on his father's side. So we can effectively kind of kick them out or focus on the remaining matches. So let's remove them from the spreadsheet and just look at Steve's paternal matches. So here's a list of his paternal matches. These are people that are not related on his mother's side, so we're going to assume that they are related on his father's side. From there, we're going to start with the first person who has a tree. And the reason we want to start with a tree is because we need to look at each of these trees and see if we can find any names in common. So we start with Ronald, and we pull up Ronald's tree. And that looks like an interesting tree, lots of people on it, but we don't really know where to go next, because we need to compare Ronald's tree with the trees of the other people in the paternal cluster. So I like to just kind of start a list of surnames. So we want to kind of look at maybe that great-grandparent level. Say we've got some Lewis, Johnson, Turner, Ward, Henderson, and Clary. Those are the names that we want to see if we can spot in anyone else's tree. Now, before we do that, we do want to see there might be multiple clusters, or there should be multiple clusters within Steve's paternal matches. So we want to see which other people in this list also share DNA with Ronald. And that includes Sharon, Tiffany, Randy, Ryan, and Nancy all share DNA with Ronald. So we assume that they all belong to the same cluster, that they're all related to Steve in the same way. So we're going to focus by looking at their trees and see if we can find some common names. So those are the first cluster, which are now highlighted in green. So we've looked at Ronald's tree. Now we're going to look at Sharon's tree. Now we skipped Joseph, remember, because Joseph doesn't share DNA in common with Ronald, so he's not part of this cluster. So we look at Sharon's tree, and we notice that she has Turner, Ward, Carson, and Nelson. Let's go back and look at Ronald's tree. Anybody familiar from Sharon's tree? I think there was a Turner and a Ward on Ronald's tree and on Sharon's tree. What this means is that Ronald and Sharon probably relate to each other through Moses and Agnes, Moses Turner and Agnes Ward. And it's possible that other people in the same cluster also belong to the same couple. So we go through all the other trees and we discover that Tiffany and Ryan also descend from Moses and Agnes Turner, and Nancy descends from Agnes's parents, Henry and Agnes Ward, so a generation back. So the next thing that we want to do is actually see how all these people are related to each other. So I like to just build a kind of descendancy tree. So we've got Moses Turner and Agnes Ward, and Agnes's brother Charles is how Nancy is connected. So all of these people are related to each other. What this means is that we can guess that Steve is also a descendant of Moses and Agnes. So we're going to temporarily put Steve in. Now on this chart, you'll notice that people with asterisks have, it just means that they've taken a DNA test, and I just listed the number of shared centimorgans under their name. It's just a very visual way of seeing how all of these people in this cluster relate to each other. So the next step is to identify all of the descendants of Moses Turner. We're assuming that that Steve is somehow among the descendants of Moses, so we need to track those lines. So Moses Turner and Agnes Ward had 4 children: Joseph, Hazel, Jesse, and Michael. And the other matches descended from Hazel, Jesse, and Michael. And just for space-wise, we're just going to focus on the descendants of Joseph. Joseph had 5 children: Joseph, Evelyn, Marilyn, Jeremy, and George. And at this point, you want to start paying attention to ages, because we're looking for somebody who was probably born in the 1940s or earlier. And Joseph, Evelyn, Marilyn, Jeremy, and George, their children were born in the 30s and 40s. So that's the point where we're going to just focus on their sons. Why are they focusing on sons? It's because we're looking for Steve's father. So Joseph had 4 sons. Evelyn did not have any sons. Marilyn had 1 son, Jeremy had 3 sons, and George had 5 sons. So these people, this group of cousins, are the people that we want to focus on when trying to figure out who Steve's father is. Now, there's a couple things that we want to focus on when you look at this. First off, again, these are the sons that were born in the 40s. So these are the people that are most likely going to fit in to being Steve's father. Remembering that his mother was born in 1947. It is possible his father was born much earlier than that, but you do want to start paying attention to the ages and time periods and birth years as well. The other thing you might want to pay attention to is locations. Remember that Kathy, Steve's mother, was living in California around the time Steve was conceived, and Moses Turner and Agnes Ward are from Massachusetts, as are most of their descendants. So what you have to ask is which of these descendants made a move to California, or were any of these descendants in the military and serving on a base in California, or anything else. You just need to figure out how to make that connection location-wise. Now, the other thing that you can do is to go back to your match list and look at other clusters, create other clusters. Notice that there are a number of people who are paternal matches, but don't belong into the cluster that we built around Ronald. So we can take the other people and see if there's a second cluster or a third cluster, and see if you can find another set of common ancestors. And once you've found that set of common ancestors, you can trace their descendants and see if any of their descendants married any of the descendants of Moses Turner and Agnes Ward. So in this case, we do that. We look at some of those other matches and we figure out another set of common ancestors with Samuel Fuller and Maggie Dupree. Samuel Fuller and Maggie Dupree, in one of their lines coming down, had a descendant named Pauline. And it turns out that Pauline married a descendant of Moses Turner and Agnes Ward, Jeremy. So because there are 2 clusters, one built around Samuel Fuller and Maggie Dupree, one built about Moses Turner and Agnes Ward, we can guess that Steve is a descendant of Jeremy and Pauline. So effectively narrowing down the number of candidates to be Steve's father. So that means that we're going to focus primarily on the 3 sons of Jeremy, who are Edward, Martin, and Keith. And again, we can go back and look at locations and learn more about their lives and where they lived. From there, there's a lot more steps that you can take to actually figure out which of these sons is Steve's father. So you want to start identifying and contacting relatives of Edward, Martin, and Keith. Ideally, what your end goal is to have more descendants test. So if you can get children or grandchildren of Edward, Martin, or Keith to do a DNA test, that will start helping you figure out how Steve is related to this family. So how are you going to find these people? Well, look for things like obituaries. There's a lot of online background finders like Spokio and Family Tree Now and a few others where you might be able to find current information for some of these people. Social media is great. Facebook, especially if there's some uncommon surnames in there, if you can find one of them and look at their friends list, then you can send some messages through Facebook. And also look at online trees. See if you can find Jeremy and Pauline in an online tree. Who's the contributor? Send them a message. That person may not have done a DNA test, or maybe they're not biologically related, and they can help you connect with people who are. So really, though, it comes down to doing additional DNA tests to actually figure out which of these 3 men, Edward, Martin, or Keith, was Steve's father. So, kind of going back, our goal here was to find an unknown parent, in this case, Steve's father. So we identified the matches for the parent. So we looked at all of Steve's matches, identified the maternal matches, kicked them out, separated them out, and focused on the paternal matches. Then we reviewed the trees of those matches. First, we created a cluster. We located that common ancestor. We identified the descendants of the common ancestor, looking for connections between dates, places, and things like that. And then we found potential matches to be Steve's father. So I hope this has kind of given you an overview of how you can use DNA to find an unknown parent. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you so much for participating in RootsTech Connect. I hope you have a wonderful day.